Welcome to my dungeon.
Welcome to Kuldrin's Krypt. I'm your host, Master Kuldrin. If you're new to the show, this is a place to dispel myths, get rid of stereotypes, and answer your questions about BDSM. You can call in at 865-268-4005 to leave your questions, or visit the Krypt at kuldrinskrypt.com. On this episode of the Krypt, we're diving into negotiations, but first I have to say hello to my lovely co-host, Funsize. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. How are you, Master Kuldrin?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good on this dreary Sunday afternoon. Looking forward to this one, as I usually am looking forward to our topics. Getting into negotiations, I'm sure you'll have a lot to say, as will I. But before we get into the main topic, I'm going to have to thank a couple of people. First, the Accidental Trucker. He's been around since the beginning of the show. He gives $1 a month, and if the listeners are getting anything out of this, I'd be grateful if they would visit our site, kuldrinskrypt.com, click on the Support Us tab, find the Patreon link where they can give $1, $5, $10, or $25 a month. It's becoming increasingly expensive to maintain this, so unless we reach a goal of $30 a month to pay for a couple of different bills with hosting and website maintenance, then I'm afraid we're going to have to go down to 2 episodes a month instead of 1 each week.
And now those rules to love by. Rule number 1, safe, sane, consensual, and informed. Rule number 2, kinky, KNKI, from the Kinky app, available on all platforms. That stands for knowledge, no intolerance, kindness, and integrity. And the quote from Mr. Paul Young: submission is not about authority, and it's not about obedience. It is all about relationships of love and respect. If you're having trouble putting together a contract for your DS or MS relationship, or if you just want something nicer, say in soft or hardbound, check out bdsmcontracts.org. I've used them in the past, and I will continue to use them in the future. Use the coupon code Kuldrin20 for a 20% discount off of all purchases. That's bdsmcontracts.org.
Everyone knows me and my definitions, so go ahead and start out with a definition, Funsize.
I would define negotiations as the agreements, disagreements, and compromises made around the limits and interests between play partners or those engaging in DS or MS relationships. Do you have anything to add or change about that?
No, I don't. Not just yet. I will reserve my right to come back to that one, though, as we negotiate this entire episode.
Yes.
So, okay, let's break that down briefly. Negotiations, agreements, disagreements, and compromises. Now, some people aren't really good at compromising or handling disagreements or agreements. Some people just like to fight. So where does this tend to come from as far as coming up with limits and interests between play partners? Where do they find what their own things are, especially considering that we're a 101 podcast? So this and every episode is more designed to go toward the beginners, other than, of course, our own limits and interest survey at our site. What are some things that they can do to kind of go through a period of self-discovery?
I would definitely say learn. Explore what is out there very cautiously. Use the vetting process to find people that you can learn from. Find mentors in your local community through Munches if you can. And also use the internet. You would be amazed what you can find and you can learn about just to get the idea of what something is. I actually have an experience to share on that where my actual sub went through the limits and interest survey off the Krypt and he loved it. But he had some questions as he was going through. For example, he didn't know what figging is. So he asked me, but, I gave him what it was, but he could have also just simply Googled for the definition and found out, oh, well, hey, maybe that's something I want to try, or maybe no, that's not something I think I could do. And I think that's an invaluable resource for the newbies in our community, is just to look things up if you don't understand what they are, or to ask questions of those who you think might, but definitely use the vetting process for that as far as who you're going to be asking questions of.
Absolutely. And on that, a few book recommendations that we can come up with. Elizabeth Kramer is probably one of the easiest reads. She's got, I think, 8 different books. They're only like 50 to 75 pages long, and you can literally finish them in a sitting, even if you're an extremely slow reader. I mean, they're just super simple, straight to the point. I love her stuff. The other one that we talk about frequently is Igniting the Fire, The Art of Romantic Submission by Master Arcane of the Crow Academy. That is an amazing book. It is even filled with some color photos to help you with positions and things of that nature, though for the beginner, some of that is diving a little bit too deep, in my opinion.
I would definitely say so too, but it is definitely worth the read regardless. I have actually read it 6 times through now.
Wow.
I keep rereading it because it was just so well written and so amazing.
Yeah.
I do have another recommendation as far as books go for our newbies out there, and it's actually one that I gave to my husband because he's still fairly new to the lifestyle. The Ultimate Guide to Kink, BDSM and Roleplay on the Erotic Edge by Lee Harrington. It's a nice little overview book.
I don't believe I've read that one.
You definitely should.
Yeah, I'll check that one out. I do have a quite extensive library, but there's so many out there, it's hard to catch them all. But so we've got our definition. We've got a couple of resources talked about. Oh, to back up, you can find all of these books on Amazon, and most are fairly inexpensive. So I know the Arcane books, $20. The Elizabeth Kramer books are $10.
$5 if you buy the ebook editions.
Oh, okay.
For our listeners.
I'm old school. I like to actually have something in my hands to turn the pages. So what makes negotiations important to you personally?
Well, for me, they define both what I'm consenting to and not consenting to, and it's also a vital way of communicating that consent. Once you have negotiated something, it's more firm in your mind. It may not be something where you can legally hold to it, as contracts and negotiations in our lifestyle are not in any way, shape, or form legal, but they make it firmer in your mind, and it's just a really good guide.
Yeah.
I feel.
Something that you can always go back to. I've said this before, but I think it's important to take these things that are written and take them into your check-in as well, so that you've got something to go by there for renegotiations. But I feel we're going to touch on that here shortly, so I'll come back to that. So there are multiple types of negotiations. We've got the scene only. These are negotiations used to communicate boundaries of what is and what is not consented upon for each scene, whether they be single scenes or individual scenes undertaken by play partners. So somewhere that you're experiencing multiple scenes with a single person. Say you and I agree to moderate spanking for a scene, but no sex of any kind, or certain toys to be used or not to be used. I had someone recently ask me to use a single tail on them, and a lot of people know that I'm not really keen on single tail, though I am finally stepping into that little arena and becoming experienced. I'm just not quite there yet. So for me to use that toy was a limit, and that came out in the negotiation, which I've also negotiated with this. This is a play partner of mine that I will be practiced enough, or should be practiced enough, within the next month to be able to provide that type of sensation, that type of play. The next type of negotiations, DS and MS relationships, one of my mostest favorite things to talk about, but I'm going to let you have the lead on this one because I think you may be the only person that enjoys talking about it more than me.
I would probably debate that. I'd say we're about even as far as that goes. But these negotiations are more serious because they're for ongoing relationships. It's not just for a play partner or for a single scene. It's something that is defining your lifestyle in that moment, because oftentimes when you have those relationships, it's almost always a 24/7, but it doesn't have to be. But you do have things outside of a single scene where you have your limits and your boundaries and rules and regulations to follow and to go through, and sometimes even rituals that are negotiated upon. So those are more serious and more particular. And you can find help in writing any contract you need for those kinds of relationships from our sponsor, bdsmcontracts.org. An example of something that we would perhaps negotiate if you and I ever entered into anything like that would be the high protocol issue. You're definitely high protocol. We've talked about this before in our Master Slave in-depth episode. And it's not something that I have ever done. So that would be a point that we wouldn't have to negotiate on to find out even if I could. So it's things like that.
That's interesting. The follow-up of to find out even, if I even could.
Yes.
And the reason that I bring that up is because I want people to realize, you've been involved in this wonderful kinky lifestyle for over a decade now.
Yes.
And you're even saying that there are things that I need more detail about. I need to negotiate on this and see what all is involved in someone's high protocol methods to see if it's even something that I could personally manage. I think that is really just a beautiful example of exactly what we're discussing here, and kind of an overtone to the entire series with every episode is to thine own self be true. Know what your limits are, know what your experience level is, and don't be afraid to admit it, because there's things I've said often, I'm not perfect. And there are a lot of things that I don't know personally, and I have to be okay with admitting that. I've recently talked to some very new people. They've been around for about 6 months, and one of them in particular is very well read. Education, just soaking it all up like a sponge. And that can tend to create a false sense of knowledge, because it's kind of like being trained on the job versus learning about it in school.
Mm-hmm.
Just about everybody that I know with a college degree has got into their career and said, okay, well, that piece of paper is nice because it shows all the hard work that I put in, but the majority of that hard work does not apply to what I am actually doing in my career. And it's the same here. Yes, we're telling you, you need to read, you need to study, you need to learn, but also the practical application of what you'll learn is going to be different, because the actual experience of these things is going to be different for each person. So while these books are important, and I stress that they are important, the actual experience of it is what is going to dictate and define each individual action within your personal BDSM lifestyle. So I just think that that's very important to point out. It's kind of like the online versus real life episode that we did.
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about, what was it? You were kind of talking about negotiations then, and in moving offline from online, you may be perfectly comfortable in online play with role playing, being beaten with a chain link flogger, but in real life, that's not going to be sexy to most people. So yeah, that real experience of it is what is actually going to shape and change things. But if you don't learn about it beforehand, then you're coming in absolutely knowing nothing at all. So that's why I say these books and resources and talking to people about it beforehand is absolutely building a necessary foundation, but your honest experience and real life experience is what is going to take that education, shape it, mold it, make it your own, make it fit your life, and make you have the most wonderful experience that you could possibly have in the lifestyle. And I know a lot of people that have done the studying, got into it, and then once they've had the actual experience of it, it wasn't for them. And then, of course, a lot of people like you and I, and probably most of our listeners that have studied, got into it, had their experience, and then it's just diving off the cliff straight into it, rolling in the deep. There they go. I think it's just something that I wish I had been told to begin with. Makita, that I've frequently talked about here, who was my source of education when I started, she taught me very well. She taught me a lot. That was one of the things that was kind of looked over, was how to, I guess, convert the book education into the scene education, the experience of it all. What you got?
I was just going to add that along with learning the experience itself, you also have to learn the experience with the person that you are negotiating with. And what that means is there will be a small training period, especially if you're going through and forming a MS or DS relationship, in which you have to train yourself, both as a dom or as a sub, to fit with the other person specifically. And that's something we often forget, is like we were just talking about with the high protocol. I don't know if I could do it, but I also recognized that, for example, your high protocol would be very different from our other guest who we had on the show, Master Arcane's high protocol household. They would be very different things. They might have similarities, but they would be very different. So if I was to approach either one in that ideal, I would have to learn from that person what was expected, and they would have to learn how to handle me.
Yeah. And that's where also through the part of the negotiation is I am working on sort of a house manual and a protocol manual as part of that, and not being offended during negotiations when you present that to someone and they're looking over it and saying, this is going to work. This is absolutely not going to work. Let's talk about that, because that is the negotiation process. That's what it's all about. And you can't be offended by what someone else is into or what someone else is not into. It's finding out if you can meet in the middle and have a successful and healthy BDSM relationship, just as any other relationship.
I actually found a term for that, and I can't remember where I found it at. I think it was on FetLife, and it was your kink is okay. And it's the idea that whatever your kink is, it's fine. It may not fit with someone else, or this part of your kink might fit perfectly with this person, but not that part of your kink, but it's all okay. And I feel like everyone needs to approach it that way, feeling like whatever your wants and needs are, they're okay. You just have to find the right fit for you. And that's part of what negotiation is all about, is finding the right fit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've hit that really well. And I mentioned this next topic earlier briefly, but renegotiations. As a definition, a renegotiation is a process of checking in at a typically defined point of time, 2 months, 4 months. I think you said that in your MS relationship, yours was every 3 months. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you check in at this predetermined point of time and you just negotiate any changes that are necessary to the pre-existing dynamic. Very simple concept. Why do people often forget it?
People often get into what they think of as a comfort zone. Sometimes it can actually become a rut where you're doing the same thing over and over again. And it's just easier to ignore any problems that might arise, or ignore any new fantasies or ideals that might come into your head on either side, because it's just comfortable with what you already have. Mm-hmm. But it's still very important because people change over time.
Off the top of your head, and this is not in our show notes, would you think of a soft limit?
A soft limit for me would be choking.
Okay. Breath play, breath control, oxygen deprivation is something that I'm really into. So it's interesting that you picked that one. Well experienced in it. It is something that is, by most people, not considered safe or sane, because it is very, very dangerous. You can force somebody into a heart attack very quickly. I mean, in a matter of seconds. And you never know when this is going to take place. But there are certain ways to do this play that is safer than others by mixing a psychological element to it with CNC or something of that nature. So with that said, if you and I got into play and that was something as we become more comfortable with, as you actually learn my experience level. And I say that because there's a big difference in hearing about somebody's experience level and learning it for yourself, and you become more comfortable. That would probably be something that maybe at the 3 month, the 3 month check-in, or however we would decide to do this, of course, this is all hypothetical, but something that I would probably come back to and say, okay, now that you're a little bit more comfortable with me, would you consider this, and give you very detailed description of how I would like to do it to kind of reassure you, or basically make my case for it. And then from you, I would get either a yes or no. It would change or it wouldn't change. But that's where a lot of people can become upset, because you've spent 3 months together, or, however long, a year, 2 years even. And I would feel like, okay, you know me well. You've had enough time to find out that my experience is not just talk. It is real experience. I have been able to do everything that I said that I was able to do, things that you wanted to do that I didn't know. I have shown you that I respect your wishes, and I have learned these abilities and not tried these things until I become comfortable in those abilities, but yet you won't trust me to do this.
Well, in that case, I would probably point out that if I said no or asked to revisit the issue at a later renegotiation in this hypothetical situation, that it may not be about my trust in you. It may not be about your experience. It may be something psychological that I'm experiencing.
Exactly.
That we need to discuss. And I think that's something people need to consider before they start getting upset during renegotiations, is you have to be able to listen to the other person's perspective.
Yes, very good. That was exactly my point. It's something that you need to really be comfortable with. This lifestyle requires a higher level of maturity than most people give in their typical relationships. Actually, this lifestyle requires the level of maturity that everyone should practice in all of their relationships, to say that correctly, and not being offended because you feel that someone isn't trusting you, and maybe they're not, and that's okay. You know, especially when you're talking about something that could be so dangerous. Even if it was just something little, something just completely off the wall. I'm trying to think of a good example of that. Like, oh, okay. I had a pet name for someone, and I spent about a year trying to convince them to let me refer to them by this certain pet name, and I'm not going to say it, but they never become comfortable with it. And I'm like, why not? Why not? And they're like, I don't know. I just don't like it. I think it's silly. It's stupid. They gave me 100 reasons, all of them very negative, on why they didn't like it. And it was a perfect opportunity, even though it was something ridiculously small, for me to get really ticked off about and take it personal. But instead, you just laugh it off and, okay, I get that. And really what it come down to was it would have completely broken their headspace in the scene if I would have referred to them by this name, because it was very comical and it just would have ruined it for them. And that was their main thing. And that's why they could never become comfortable with me saying it. So very small, stupid thing that I have known people that have become offended by things like that. So in negotiations and renegotiations, this is not a time to bring your ego or a very hard stance on things. It's not a time for a dom to be a dom or a sub to be a sub. It is time for equality, partnership, and open, honest communication, which should be maintained throughout the relationship. What else?
I would also add that negotiations are times to add new things. There could be something that was a hard limit that you could say had moved into a soft limit, or you might have found something new that you wanted to try. I've actually started to explore the idea of pet play. So that's something new for me to try and learn that I would have to renegotiate with any dominant partner that I had for a renegotiation experience. So those things are pretty important to bring up too.
Have you discovered a certain pet that you're relating to?
I'm leaning towards a cat currently, just because I'm very much a cat person.
Meow. Well, that's interesting. Not to take away from what you said by joking about the pet play. But yes, I 100% agree. It is something that needs to be taken very seriously. All right. So to hit a quick wrap up, negotiations, something that needs to be done to come to an agreement on different types of activities, ways that the relationship will go, the communication between you, setting scheduled times to renegotiate, understanding the importance of them. A relationship is not going to make it without it, and maintaining a schedule with it 90% of the time or better, I believe. And then, of course, we talked about the different types, the sane only, DS and MS, and then the renegotiation. I think that we have done very well in hitting this topic in a straightforward, simple, short form. Do you have any last words on the topic?
No, I think we did wrap it up really well.
Excellent. So, Funsize, I think we've done really well with this. I will talk to you next Sunday for recording our consensual non-consent revisit. In the meantime, go to kuldrinskrypt.com for show notes, how to subscribe information, and the link to our Facebook group so you can take part in the conversation and be eligible for the monthly giveaways. Our sponsor, bdsmcontracts.org, has actually supplied us with a few soft and hardbound 25-page books to give away. These contracts are absolutely beautifully done, very, very intensive, and I highly recommend that you check out their site. Also, while you're there, click on the Support Us tab for that Patreon link. And again, unfortunately, due to costs, we are going to have to move this down to just 2 episodes a month instead of 1 weekly if we cannot reach a goal of $30 a month through the supporting of Patreon. We will be putting up some clips there that only the Patreon supporters will be getting. There'll be some behind the scenes stuff, some outtakes from the show, just some random things, maybe some giveaways there that you can't get on the Facebook group. You can give as little as $1 a month there, and we're very grateful for everything that we receive. It's just becoming a little too expensive at this point to maintain weekly episodes. Also, all of our contact information is there. I can be reached directly, sir, at kuldrinscrypt.com, and Funsize.
I can be reached at Funsize at kuldrinscrypt.com.
All right. That does it for this episode. This has been Master Kuldrin and Funsize for kuldrinscrypt.com. Unearth the truth.